Okay, because I'm watching on screen and I still, oh, that's mine, right. Okay, hi everybody. I'm really sorry. I am not there in person. I'm not there to make eye contact with anybody, but that's one of the consequences of living in Urbana-Champaign and going through O'Hare. So speaking of airports, and well, Brooke explained that she would be introducing this segment of the workshop from taking the 30,000-foot view, and I then coming in with the tarmac view of things, like what it's like for a scientist who's been engaged in communicating with the public, and in my case for more than 30 years. So if we can do the next slide, I think that's how we're going to do that, right? Right. Well, if the phrase graphing tool Google Ngram viewers to be believed, interest in science communication is really now at an all-time high. Next slide. And among the plethora of blogs, articles, and scientific studies that have been appearing of late, including this story on from The Guardian in the UK about the Wellcome Trust investment in public engagement, topics for discussion include how and why scientists engage in public communication, and if in fact it is, as described by eminent neuroscientist Dame Nancy Rothwell, simply a hobby or a bolt-on. Next slide. So in my case, why did I get started in this enterprise? I'm an entomologist and I like insects. I like looking at them, I like writing about them, I like learning about them, and I especially like telling other people about them. Now, why I take such pleasure in the class insect is a little bit difficult to understand, particularly because for the first 18 years of my life, I was actually terrified of insects. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. So I finally confronted my fears at college. Back. Back N-2, please. Can we go back? Back again? Oh, okay, no, this is perfect, sorry. Okay, so I entered Yale as a biology major. I had AP credits, so I placed out of introductory biology, and I was allowed to take, as a freshman, an upper-level course. Unfortunately, or so it seemed at the time, the only course that fit my schedule was one taught by Charles Remington called Terrestrial Arthropods, which I had the feeling had something to do with insects. So faced with otherwise unresolvable scheduling conflicts, I decided an entomology course might be just what I needed in order to learn which insects I should be afraid of and which ones I shouldn't. So next slide. I'm not seeing it. Next slide. Okay. Right. It wasn't easy. Getting through the class was a struggle, particularly the lab. The very first laboratory exercise involved live dissection of cockroaches, etherizing them to keep them alive so we could see the silvery folds of their tracheae, their respiratory system. And these were not your sort of urban apartment-dwelling cockroaches. These were tropical giants imported so that we could see them without magnification. And when I heard this, I just about burst into tears in the middle of class, but managed to get through it with only a minimum of nausea, kept going to class, kept getting more and more interested. Next slide. So by the end of the semester, I was actually completely captivated and kind of had learned some fundamental truths about myself and about in addition to about insects, and that's, well, it would have been nice to say I finished up the semester with the highest grade in the class, but in fact I ended with a pretty much middling B. It was Yale University after all, and I was a freshman, but the course may not have helped my grade point average. It definitely changed my life, and I've been won over to the view that my fear of insects and probably other people's fears stem from ignorance. Knowledge really is power. I then set out to pursue more knowledge and study entomology in graduate school at Cornell. And it was there at the graduate dorm. I didn't have much of a social life and spent a lot of time in the lab. Next slide. And I was in the lab one day. I picked up a copy of Horticulture magazine, which was lying around the lab, and I read a story by Anne Moffat on the plant. This is a Horticulture magazine. It's for gardeners. It's sort of not for scientists. But she'd written about the plant-insect coevolutionary arms race. I could easily have written this article because that's actually what I was doing my thesis research on. So inspired, I sat down for a couple of hours in the library, wrote about 1,000 words on the cabbage white butterfly and its interaction with its host plants in the crucifer family, and I sent it to the magazine. Next slide. In a few weeks, I was holding a check for $125, and I had a new hobby. And next slide after that. So as of 2013, I've written over 170 articles for magazines, newspapers, and the like, 6 books for the general public. It's cathartic, it's enjoyable, and now it's even tax deductible. And fortunately for me, Class Insecta is an essentially inexhaustible source of entertaining material that can be pitched to just about any sort of literary objective. Next slide. But writing books and magazine articles is kind of old-style communication, which is aimed at what's already the science-friendly public. One day on campus, as a graduate student, I had an inspiration about another idea to reach people. I walked by a poster showing, announcing the showing of Godzilla, the 1954 Japanese sci-fi movie, sponsored by the Asian American Student Association, and I thought, well, if Asian American students can have a sense of humor about their identity, why not entomologists? Next slide. So I pitched the idea of having an insect fear film festival to Dr. Ed Smith, who was then the head of the entomology department at Cornell. He thought such a festival would be undignified and suggested an alternative idea, which would be to have a festival featuring educational documentaries, like the Hellstrom Chronicle. Next slide. Now, although it's sensationalized, the documentary-style Hellstrom Chronicles actually won Best Cinematography Award at the 1971 Cannes Film Festival, where other such films as Sorrow and the Pity were being recognized. So this kind of missed the point of what I was getting at. So I shelved the idea, next slide, until I had another opportunity as a faculty member, sort of worked a couple of years to establish my street cred as a scientist, then pitched the idea to my department head, Stanley Friedman, and he thought it was a great idea. And we then set about planning our first festival. Next slide. We optimistically called it the first annual Insect Fear Film Festival. It was, as it were, a screaming success. Next slide. You can see we showed 2 very bad science fiction films, although them was not as bad as it could be. So the first Insect Fear Film Festival led to the second, and then the third, and the fourth, and so on, for 28 more years. As you can see from the posters, after a while, instead of just showing insect fear films, you can go back, that from different eras, we decided to focus on a theme. The fourth festival was female insect fear films. You can see non-insect arthropod fear films. We had a festival based on cockroaches, an all-fly program in our 9th festival. One on metamorphosis, another with our 12th festival was just about parasites and the like. Now, next slide. So building a festival around a theme allowed us to provide new information and new activities every year. Just as an example, at the Mosquito Fear Film Festival, which featured a program of films, insect science fiction films just about mosquitoes, we also held a blood drive that netted 22 pints of blood. It was the theme of which was Starve a Mosquito, Donate Your Blood. Next slide. So at the first festival, in addition to just showing films, we offered a lot of hands-on activities, including a sort of meet the stars opportunity, an insect petting zoo, so that the audience could get up close and personal with the actual arthropods rather than the Hollywood depiction of those arthropods. Next slide. So these hands-on activities were incorporated and expanded upon in all future festivals, and running the gamut, we have all kinds of displays, demonstrations, interactive exhibits, waggle dancing by beekeepers, face painting, and the like. Next slide. For our 10th festival, we added an annual art contest for our local students in basically K through 12, with award recognition at the festival and awards for best link to the theme, the most realistic depiction of insects, and the like. Next slide. So this past February, we had our 30th festival, and just to do something special, we had our program organized around X-Files, the television series and the films. 9 episodes of the TV series, and one of the 2 feature films dealt with insects. Much to my sheer delight and utter amazement, we invited Chris Carter, the creator, writer, director, producer of X-Files, to come to the festival as our special guest, and he actually did come. Not only did he come, he brought along Darren Morgan, who's an Emmy Award-winning scriptwriter and author of the episode War of the Coprophages, featuring USDA entomologist Dr. Bambi Berenbaum. No, it is not a coincidence. When Darren Morgan, and actually he's one of those guys, science-friendly guys who'd read some of the books I'd written, used them for background, and when it came time for him to come up with a plausible name for a USDA entomologist, he decided Berenbaum sounded like an entomologist. Bambi was his contribution because the plot demanded that, in his words, Dr. Berenbaum be a luscious babe, although in this case art does not imitate life. Next slide. Well, the festival has attracted considerable press attention over the years. Regionally, nationally, we have been covered from newspapers ranging from the Chicago Tribune to the Los Angeles Times to the Washington Post, USA Today. Internationally, the gamut has run from the International Herald Tribune to Der Spiegel to Jerusalem Post to the Wellington, New Zealand Dominion. If we had any better press coverage, it would probably have to be from the moon. Magazine coverage ran the gamut from science news sources to nature magazines, even to entertainment industry magazines. I can't think of too many other events covered not only by Chemical and Engineering News, but also by Twilight Zone magazine and Premiere. Next slide. So even the tabloids have covered the festival. The Star, newspaper one of those grocery store tabloids, in 1989 took me to task during our Orthopteran Fear Film Festival for revealing that crickets are actually garbage-eating cannibals. The Disney archivist took issue with me referring to Jiminy Cricket in such terms. So be careful when you speak truth to power. Next slide. And happy to say that now insect festivals are a national phenomenon. Many universities have similarly themed festivals. There's an insect horror film festival at Iowa State. Purdue has a bug bowl. Also happy to say Cornell finally came around. They also have an insect festival, and it's even gone international. There are festivals at Plymouth, for example, that combines film and hands-on activities. Next slide. Now, in terms of how we actually put on this festival, I picked the theme and the films. The festival involves an enormous amount of work on the part of our University of Illinois Entomology Graduate Students Association, EGSA, which again runs a gamut from booking the venue, arranging publicity, coordinating the art contest, arranging for exhibits, designing and selling T-shirts, wrangling the insects for the crowds, face painting, and managing crowds in general. So what's in it for them? Why are graduate students actively involved in this enterprise? Next slide. Well, hands-on activities allow students to develop interactive communication skills with a wide range of audiences. Conducting an annual art contest for local students builds organizational skills. Working with campus partners opens up new scientific collaborations. For example, with BugScope at our National Center for Supercomputing Applications. This is an environmental scanning electron microscope facility which allows remote interactions with classrooms all around the country, projecting scanning EM images of small things such as insects. Publicizing the festival provides experience interacting with media, newspaper, television, and radio interviews. And organizing the festival provides evidence of service and leadership skills and a resume. But most importantly, in the context of this workshop, because the EGSA, the Entomology Graduate Student Organization, is a campus-registered student organization, there's been steady campus funding to support the festival. And in fact, EGSA secures the funds that we need to purchase the non-theatrical video exhibition rights for the films, to order supplies, to just in general put on this festival. Next slide. So the festival is only once a year, which leaves plenty of time during the rest of the year for me to expand my audience. I almost never refuse an invitation to speak to any group of people, and because insects are so amazingly diverse, I rarely give the same talk twice. Just as an example, and I talked to the local Sierra Club about endangered insects, the Eastern Illinois Veterinary Society on insects on pets, the Champaign Medical Society on drugs derived from insects, the Champaign Ladies Art Club heard about insects and art, the Sinai Temple Adult Learners Club learned about Old Testament insects, the Urbana's Herb Society heard about insects that eat herbs, and the Noontime Kiwanis Club got a lecture on edible insects. So I visited really hundreds of schools, community groups, business associations, and the like, and I found audiences interested and willing to learn, age, race, religion, political party, and ethnic origins notwithstanding. Next slide. Now, back on campus, I'd been lobbying my department head to let me teach a general education course in entomology. These courses are among the toughest and least desirable campus assignments. Teaching biology to a group of students who not only couldn't care less about biology, but are in the class because they hope it's easier than the gen ed that's offered in microbiology. The least motivated, least favorably disposed, this is my greatest challenge. So my department head was very reluctant to let me do this, but after I was promoted to full professor, he decided I was old enough to take care of myself, and that spring I began teaching insects and people for the first time. Next slide. Now, my aim is to exploit the fact that insects are part of every aspect of human culture, so no matter what their majors are, I could convince students that insects are worth knowing about, that mastering some aspects of their biology can actually enrich their lives. Next slide. And the course began with an enrollment of about 11. It was ultimately capped at 220. As I'd hoped, I taught insects from every undergraduate college on this campus, and probably I've learned as much from them as they have from me. I doubt I would otherwise have acquired an impressive collection of punk and indie rock songs featuring insects. Pansy Division, for example, is a gay funny punk group that on their album Undressed featured the song Crabby Day, which is an ode to the crab louse, and the indie rock group Yeah Yeah Yeahs has a album cover featuring their song called Mosquitoes, Mosquitoes. So nor would I know much about insect or arthropod tattoos. Next slide. So every year in this class, there's always a few entomophobes. They're there for reasons I can relate to. The course fit into their schedule, and they needed it to fulfill a requirement, just like me, many years ago. And I make a special effort to reach out to those people. I used to be one of them. Overall, there have been some amazing achievements, even a few political science majors, for example, who ultimately decide to major in entomology. But I'm proudest of the smaller successes, the metamorphosis of fear and loathing into grudging admiration and respect for the predominant form of animal life on the planet. Next slide. And these students are the reason I started tweeting. Every class lecture, I wanted to bring in a news story about insects to show them that how much our lives intersect with insects. And when the class ended, I actually found myself looking for an outlet for those news stories. So I run a Twitter feed, basically insect news. I think it's probably pretty lame, but amazingly have almost 1,000 followers. Next slide. I'm kind of astonished. I'm not an influence generator, but I am considered a specialist, and as such, I'm qualified to comment on what kinds of entomological tweets generate insects. I'm amazingly influential on an odd collection of topics. You can see vampires, disease, and politics. Next slide. Very limited scope. Bees in particular. Any tweets about bees tend to get a lot of interest. Next slide. Oh, sorry, that's fine. The time honeybees were found foraging on waste M&Ms at a biogas facility in France and producing blue and green honey, that one got a lot of interest. And on this next slide, zombie giant killer bees also generate a lot of traffic, as was the case when the film 1313 Giant Killer Bees was released, which I think may be the first gay porn insect fear film. Next slide. I wish I could be there to see audience reaction. I have no idea what's going on in that room. Okay, but how sustainable are these activities? Can they be unhobbified? Historical barriers, as Brooke very nicely laid out, include the fact that graduate program curricula don't leave a lot of room for formal training and public communication. Criteria for promotion and tenure have historically not placed much weight on public engagement. There are few objective metrics for evaluating the quality of public engagement efforts by scientists. very few tangible rewards for public engagement at any career level. And finally, there are few opportunities for continuing education with respect to media, including social media training for scientists. I have done so many clumsy things on Twitter. I'm sure I've created a lot of inadvertent amusement among real tweeters about inappropriate or inept use of hashtags and the like. Next slide. So our own campus finally recognized public engagement in promotion and tenure in 2003. This is a memo from a committee that I served on, the Ad Hoc Committee for Evaluating Public Service for Promotion and Tenure. And you see from the multiple edits, one of our charges was to rewrite the promotion documents to provide guidance as to how to evaluate the quality of public engagement. Next slide. So now the infamous Communication 9, the Provost's official guide to promotion and tenure on our campus, contains explicit instructions on assessing, quote, evidence of excellence in public engagement activities. Next slide. In 1997, the National Science Foundation introduced broader impacts as one of 2 criteria for evaluation of all proposals, thereby, in theory, improving the funding stream for engagement. In order to be funded by NSF, there has to be evidence of broader impact in the form of, at least in part, outreach and public engagement. Next slide. The National Science Board just recently completed a study, 2011 results were released, evaluating these broader impacts in NSF proposals, and resoundingly recommended maintaining those. And in fact, carefully in their report laid out the many avenues through which broader impacts could be achieved through NSF. Next slide. But as the reviews for my most recent grant proposal, which I just received Tuesday that was declined, point out, there's no uniform system for evaluating, especially prospectively, the quality of public engagement. You can see the highlighted in red. I got criticized on this proposal that there's only modest involvement of undergraduates, 1 per year. I didn't know there was a minimum or maximum number, and is number the only criterion for evaluating the quality? And another frustrating comment, the text does not mention specific efforts and strategies to recruit from underrepresented groups, although the PIs have good track records in this area. So that, again, knowing what to put into a proposal and not knowing how it's going to be evaluated, not that much different from other aspects of NSF review. Another reviewer appreciated our effort to construct an activity for second grade classes in Unit 4 in Champaign schools, but would have liked to know how many second graders would be reached. Next slide. As for the National Academies, clearly there's an interest in public engagement today. As far as I can tell, it goes back at least to 1984. I did a search on the National Academies press site looking for use of the term public outreach in NAS reports. The earliest reference I found was 1984. This is an incomplete survey, but in general, it looks as if the use of the term public outreach is in fact increasing. Now, in 2007, I helped write one of those reports. Next slide. And that was the Committee on the Status of Pollinators in North America. So, in fact, our recommendations explicitly involved public engagement. In October 2006, we released our report. Next slide. Our committee was charged with examining available data to answer a series of questions relating to the status of pollinators in North America. Are they experiencing decline? If there are demonstrable declines, what are their causes? What are the consequences in terms of agricultural and natural systems? What research and monitoring are needed to improve information, and how can we prevent slow or reverse decline? Next slide. Among our findings was that we have very little information, baseline data, on most of our wild pollinators, and even questionable data on our managed pollinators. But in order to reverse or slow decline, we needed widespread adoption of pollinator-friendly practices, and we needed public outreach as a means of achieving that goal. One of our recommendations then was to emphasize public outreach and to get citizen scientists involved in baseline monitoring. Next slide. So this recommendation was, I served as chair of that committee, went back to my home institution, and actually decided to try to implement some of those recommendations. We started a citizen science monitoring effort that was inspired by the report, which we call Bee Spotter. Next slide. So Bee Spotters is a web interface that allows citizen scientists to upload digital images of honeybees and bumblebees in the state of Illinois, 11 species of bumblebees, to identify them based on user-friendly color-based keys and geolocate them. Date and locality information are also entered. We cross-reference these with the historical collection of bumblebees in the Illinois Natural History Survey. And you can see some of the bee spottings provided by citizen scientists, spectacular images, and very useful information. Next slide. So this effort was launched in 2007 as part of a Chicago Partnership Initiative on the part of our Office of the Vice Chancellor for Public Engagement and Institutional Advancement. They'd given us the funding to get this site up and running. That said, the funding was for only 1 year and no subsequent funds for maintaining the site, and it has been running on altruism ever since. Next slide. But despite the lack of a solid funding base, it's been remarkably successful. We launched in October 2007. Not a great month for seeing bumblebees in the Midwest. Notwithstanding, we had 100 people log in and register. By 2011, we had over 1,000 bee spotters contributing images, and the number is now approaching 2,000 just a few years later. Next slide. What's happened within a year of the launch of the site, a citizen scientist uploaded 2 unmistakable images of Bombus affinis, the rusty patch bumblebee, which was thought to be extinct in the state of Illinois. And these sightings have subsequently been confirmed every year across the state. So a species of bumblebee thought to be gone from Illinois was actually rediscovered by a citizen scientist. Next slide. It was a citizen scientist in the Chicagoland area who actually helped us realize that we hadn't even incorporated all of the potential bumblebees. Bombus rufocinctus is another species of bumblebee that was not thought to be, hadn't been seen in the Chicagoland area in some 30 years, and a citizen scientist uploaded again an unmistakable image of Bombus rufocinctus. Next slide. But again, it's running on altruism. Another public engagement project inspired by the National Research Council report was our University of Illinois Pollinatarium. This is a discovery science center dedicated to raising public awareness of and appreciation for pollinators. It's basically repurposing a building that was constructed as a pesticide storage shed, and we managed this rebuilding thanks to the guy who the arrow is pointing to, Peter Fox, a local developer who adopted this project, used his influence and expertise without financial help from the campus to convert this former pesticide storage shed into a science center for the community. Next slide. So the Pollinatarium offers displays, interactive exhibits, weekend lectures, insect photography and pollinator gardening classes, art and museum, music performances, and ventriloquism performances relating to pollination, and active working beehive. Next slide. So this is, we have over 2,000 visitors a year at this small facility. From all of the Champaign Unit 4 second grade classes come community college, University of Illinois classes use it, community groups run the gamut from Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts to Master Naturalists, Master Gardeners. We're part of a museum consortium. Girls do science camps. We have beekeeping groups that come regularly. We celebrate National Pollinator Week there, drop-in visitors from 20 states and 6 countries. This year we've started a children's salsa garden where children plant, maintain, and harvest plants for making salsa. A new Adopt a Caterpillar program for kids who find caterpillars and don't know what to feed them. They can bring them in, and we've rescued about 3 dozen caterpillars, finding a new home in the Pollinatarium this year. Next slide. Now, the Pollinatarium has exactly 1 staff member, Leslie Dean. The only reason there is a half-time academic professional position at all is that when I received the Tyler Prize for Environmental Achievement in 2011, I politely declined University of Illinois President Bob Easter's request to have a campus celebration, and instead asked him if he could apply that money that would have gone to a party toward a salary line for the pollinatarium so we would not have to rely on part-time hourlies and volunteers. It's great that there are volunteers, but altruism is not really a sustainable model for what appear to be societal good services. Next slide. So are things better than they used to be? I have to say yes. While going through our departmental archive, I uncovered this letter to then head of the department, Clell Metcalf, from Dean Babcock of LIS, dated June 20th, 1927. My dear Professor Metcalf, some time ago I approved 2 or 3 expense vouchers for men in your department who had been speaking before high school audiences on entomological subjects. This is just a memorandum of my unwillingness to approve any more such vouchers. If high schools wish to have such talks, they should pay the necessary traveling expenses. So some of these infrastructure barriers have been in place for a very long time. Next slide. It's also better than it is when I got started as an assistant professor in 1981. This article appeared in Science, Technology, and Human Values, decrying the fact that scientists willing to share their knowledge with the public are occasionally ostracized by their colleagues. Next slide. But maybe we've finally, maybe society has caught up with the need, and maybe this is a new era, an incredibly opportune time for us to examine those barriers and see what we can do about lowering them. One very good sign is that Fox Television, the network that brings you Family Guy and American Dad and other Seth MacFarlane animated series, is partnering with Seth MacFarlane to produce a primetime program, a reworking of Cosmos featuring Neil deGrasse Tyson, the Hayden Planetarium scientist in residence, on Fox. This is considered a worthwhile enterprise, not only by Seth MacFarlane, by science advisor John Holdren. So where Seth MacFarlane and John Holdren converge, how can we go wrong? Thank you. I don't know if there's time for questions or a mechanism for soliciting questions, but thanks for listening. I wish I could see you all, but thank you with some eye contact. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Thank you, May. So May, we're going to hold. Yeah, we're going to hold questions because we have a panel that we're going to bring up on stage right now,
okay.
And we'll hold questions to the end because we're going to hear from a few other scientists about their engagement. So I want to bring up David Ewing Duncan, who's one of our fellow roundtable members, who is an esteemed journalist, novelist, author, and we appreciate that he's taking time away from working on his novel right now to join our roundtable. I'm just going to turn it right over to you, David, if you want to invite your panelists. Come on up, guys. Danielle, Leany. And then is Craig McLean is one of our other casualties of the weather, but I think he's joining us up here. And are you there, Craig?
I'm here on audio.
Oh, right. Okay, great. Okay, we're just getting settled, and I'm going to turn it over to David, and we'll hear Craig over audio. Thanks, guys.
Great.